And there we are. We should be live. Hello, everyone. Yes, Jackman, you are in the right place. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this impromptu little chat stream. Thanks for coming over from FantastiCon. I'm James Vigor. I'm author of The Reality Exchange, and I'm here with the illustrious Drew Wagar, author of the incredible Shadeward saga. I just realised that I probably should have thought about the ordering of our cameras before I set the stream live, because currently I have the Shadeward saga beneath me and Drew has the Reality Exchange beneath him. But
Never mind.
I'm sure you're all intelligent enough people to figure out what's going on there. So yes, there are links right beneath the stream where you can all grab our books, should you be so inclined. So yeah, we don't really have anything planned out to chat about, but just
Two authors sort of hanging out, chewing the fat. Yeah,
pretty much. So this is my first book launch, and it's rather unfortunate, I'll admit, that it had to happen in this capacity. I was quite I was dreaming of the day when I would be able to sit behind a desk with a small tower of books. I do have a very small tower of books. I've got 5 just down here. But it's just not quite the same, is it?
This whole virtual thing isn't quite as exciting as the real thing, though. I'm afraid not.
But it is what it is, and I think we're making something really good out of this. So when was your first book launch? Was that with Elite Reclamation? Was that your first full novel? Or did you have one before that?
With Fantastic Books, yes. Not my first book launch, though. I launched one back in 2011.
Okay.
Which was the first book I ever wrote, actually, which is a book called Torn, which has got nothing to do with science fiction or fantasy at all. But that was the first book I ever launched. So yeah, that precedes Reclamation by 3 years, I think.
Was that a self-publish?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
How did that go by comparison?
Yes. Well, I actually did that at Waterstones in my local town. So I just rang them up on the off chance and said, I've just written this book. And they went, congratulations. And I said, any chance I could have a tower of books in your stall and sign a few copies and stick a notice outside? And they said, well, what sort of book is it? And it was... it's a sort of romance, drama, comedy, sort of thing. It's definitely not science fiction anyway. It's a bit off topic for my normal stuff.
Sure.
And they said, oh, that sounds interesting. So bring a few copies in. So basically, I just pressed the self-publish button on Amazon, got myself some author copies, took them in a box, and sat there. And and to be fair, not vast. I probably sold about 20 copies in the entire day. But
yeah, that's not bad.
It's all right. They kept me copiously supplied with tea and biscuits, and wandered across, and a few people bought the books, and it was sort of quite a pleasant day, really. But fairly low key.
I'm actually just wondering. I'm getting a bit of stuttering on the stream. I don't know if it's just because I'm streaming it myself, but I'm just wondering if I need to downscale the video resolution. How is it for everyone in the chat? Because when I was doing my pre-records for FantastiCon, I was doing it with this software, and I didn't want to downscale the resolution too much. And I just realised I haven't set that back. So how is it for everyone? Do I need to lower the quality a little? Laptop's not getting any stuttering. Good to see you, by the way. Okay, in that case, I will carry on until someone tells me it is unwatchable. So speaking of those pre-records, when I was watching your launch earlier on, of course, and the incredible detail you went into with every step of the process and your world building. It was wonderful to listen to, but I couldn't help feeling just a little bit jealous because I think we had the same notes to record these videos to, but I was quite conscious of the idea that they needed to be like 3 to 5 minutes long in most cases, And yours felt a little longer than that.
It was a lot longer than that. When those instructions came through, I thought, 3 minutes? I can't do something as short in 3 minutes. Anybody who knows me knows I ramble on for hours and hours and hours, given half a chance. So I looked at that and thought, well, I'll aim for 3 minutes. And it came out near sort of 7 to 9. So I thought, well, that'll do.
Yeah, because
I'll go off and see what Dan says. And he didn't complain, so I think I got away with it.
Well, I don't think he can just say that they're too long. We can't show anything from Drew Wagar at our event. We'll have to sideline him. He's not that important anyway. No one will miss it. Yeah, I couldn't help watching all your notes on world building, and it's stuff that I paid a fair bit of attention to while I was writing the Reality Exchange. Certainly not to the same degree. I wasn't building the geography of this planet that I'd invented, or the particular details of the politics or anything like that. But I had some good notes in there and some good ideas about how the world worked, and it's stuff I haven't really touched on in a lot of the promotional material. I've tried to follow the advice to hook people in and then build the world a little bit later. And
it's usually a good way of doing it, to be honest.
Yeah, get them attached, draw them in, and then let them experience the world, which you definitely do in the book. So my chapter 1 reading is on my YouTube channel, and for anyone who's listened to that, you can tell that it basically cuts to the action right away. Chapter 2 is where it starts talking a little bit more about how the world works.
Yeah. You had done quite a lot of work. I remember we had some conversations quite a while back now, obviously, but pre the book, or at least pre a main draft of the book, about how you were going to do the faster than light travel between stars without going into kind of the old warp drive versus hyperspace thing, which I thought you were very brave doing, actually, to be honest, because it's quite hard to think of a new faster than light travel that is not a bit derivative of something else. But I thought you did a rather good job, so well done on that for a start.
Thank you.
But you can tell that there's some thinking gone into that, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. So I was kind of on the same page as you when I'm thinking I'd quite like for there to be as much a grounding in real science as possible. So I brought my knowledge of technology and how sort of because I come from a background of computer games programming.
Yep.
So actually, a lot of the technology in the game is it bears quite a close resemblance to a lot of that. Where was I going with this? Oh yes, the faster than light. In terms of keeping it close to real science, of course, I took some license with that, but I like the idea that you can effectively get somewhere within a reasonable space of time across these cosmic distances without having to travel faster than light. So you basically just have to shorten the distance. It's kind of that wormhole kind of idea, but with it's not just a tunnel. It's like a wormhole if it were a 3D volume. I guess if
you want to come up with something that's sort of technically vaguely plausible. I mean, nobody's going to be able to build one of these things anytime soon, obviously. But you also you need it as a narrative device as well. So you've got to be thinking of the story and think, okay, well, in your case, probably at least half of the book is set on the ships when they're in that drive space, isn't it? So it's a tension device for the story as well, and it has to work like that. And I like the way that you brought in things like, well, we can't just switch it off because then we'll all die horribly as it comes back into real space. You can't just shut down the FTL drive. You have to go through a process of acclimatizing to the various different stages. So that gives you a tension, because everybody who's reading the story knows that there are some technicalities about the drive and the way it works and what you have to do when you're traveling in the drive to avoid the acceleration, all those kind of good things, which gives you the narrative tension, which allows you to frame your scene. So it's not just a piece of technology; it's a construct for the actual book, which I think is you've done a really good job of bringing something new to that, which I quite enjoyed. So that was good, and you can tell you thought about it.
I took some notes from you really early on. This was about 5 or so years ago now, when I I had this idea for a book, and I was ready to put pen to paper. And I first reached out to Dan Grubb because he's worked with so many different authors. He knows the industry like the back of his hand. And I asked him, where's the best place to start? And I remember his very first message back was really resisting the urge to say it at the beginning, in true Dan Grubb fashion. But no, he gave me some really good ideas about planning and basically saying you need to have some solid idea of where you're going with this. And then I came to you, and you gave me some really solid guidance based on the way that you work and the way that you've done it in the past. And I found your advice incredibly useful, especially when it comes to creating technologies. So there are some fundamental technologies in the reality exchange, in particular the faster than light drive. There's something called the SSR system, which we've vaguely alluded to in this conversation, which I haven't really talked about at great length before, because I've kind of been trying to keep it a little bit under wraps. But considering it's the launch, I feel like I can delve a little bit into the later stuff. So a lot of the book focuses on this SSR system, this suspension and simulated recreation is basically a way that you can keep your body safe while traveling in these quote-unquote faster than light conditions, and entertain your brain at the same time while by living in a virtual space. And it's things like these fundamental technologies. When I was writing them, I needed to make sure that, and again, this comes back to what you were saying before about how things like science fiction and fantasy stuff, they often sort of twist the rules as they go.
Yeah, that annoys me.
And things are different later in the book, and they just feel a bit too convenient, and it doesn't quite match up. And I had this planning document that acted as this definitive resource for making sure that when I was writing something about faster than light, or when I was writing something about Winter's spinal implant, or something like that, that everything I was doing was based around these rigid notes about how things work and how things don't work. And that was a really valuable resource that I created early on based on your advice. So I have to thank you for pointing me in that direction.
I just found it useful to set yourself some rules, I mean, and you can do the same in the fantasy realm. If you're writing a Tolkien type sort of fantasy story, if your wizard is able to unlock doors with a wave of his wand, and then in chapter 18 near the end of the book, for some reason he's suddenly unable to unlock doors. You say, well, what? Why can't he open the door?
And then they have to create some new magical device where it's like, oh no, it's a particular kind of lock.
Exactly, and you kind of think, no. So if you work out those rules in your background before you start,
you didn't mention that in book one.
Exactly. So so it's things like that, and if your hyperdrive can get from A to B in a certain length of time, then it can't suddenly do it in half the time when the plot needs it. Those sort of things are I find a bit sloppy. I try to avoid them if I can. It does make it harder because you have to sometimes think, actually, I've got to this point in my plot. Things haven't necessarily quite gone the way I wanted to write them. And I'm in a sort of a bit of a hole, and I need to get these guys out of trouble in some plausible way based on the rules that I've set myself. And sometimes that can cause you to go like, now I need to be a bit more creative. But there's usually a way out of it.
It's particularly troublesome, I've found, now that I'm writing a sequel. And I will admit, I've made a mistake with how I approach this, because I came up with the idea of the reality exchange as a single story, and that is what is encompassed in this book. But as I was writing it, I realised this isn't enough. There's got to be more. And I've now got a second plot, and I'm really, really happy with it. But there were definitely challenges in doing that where I realised I need to do some stuff here, and the rules I've written before don't necessarily allow for it. And yeah, I'm pleased to say I've managed to do that without some cheesy inconsistencies or.
I actually had the same problem with Shadeward. Actually, in book 2, there's a small scene where one of the protagonists is trying to mentally influence a glass of water, because she's heard rumors that people in the past were able to do this, And she thinks she's quite powerful with this capability she has, and she's trying to concentrate on this glass of water and basically make it boil. And she can't do it. Is the scene that has ended up being wrote. In the original scene I wrote, she isn't able to do it until she gets angry, and then the water suddenly boils and goes everywhere. And then I realised, I thought, actually, I can't do that. I'm breaking my own rules, because there can't be there's no way for mental energy to actually do that in any form at all in our universe. And I thought, actually, that's going to be a mistake to do that. I'm going to have to take that out and just leave her frustrated that she can't do anything. But in fact, nobody can. So there's little things like that. I thought, actually, I've got to backpedal from what was actually quite a cool scene. I thought, actually, I can't use it because I'm breaking my own rules. So it can be a little bit of a straitjacket sometimes.
I just having a look at Twitch chat a little bit here. I like the way the text scrolled as you did the reading from the book. Thank you very much, Scribbled7. Yeah, I mostly did that because I couldn't show my face, because you would have seen all of the cuts where I messed up the reading. Making the whole space travel setting feel more believable. Yeah, like I say, trying to ground things as much as possible in real science while still allowing myself to do some sci-fi stuff was...
Yeah, I mean, at the end of it, it's still science fiction, isn't it? It's still you're allowed to be fiction, and you can assume that in the hundreds of years or thousands of years in the future that somebody's going to invent some cool stuff. That we've got to the end of physics is always the belief of the current time, isn't it? And it's never the case. So
yeah, and I've got to assume I'm not a physicist. I've got to assume I'm going to get things wrong anyway. I might as well embrace it. I find when it gets inconsistent like that with the unlocked door issue challenging, it damages disbelief suspension, jars and pulls you out of the story. Absolutely. Spent ages making rules for Gravity's Arrow. Yeah, the Gravity's Arrow stuff, we're having a conversation about that, which I think may be broadcast tomorrow, so I don't want to talk too much about,
that.
But
yep.
I haven't read Gravity's Arrow, but based on what Jack Mann was saying about how his technology works in that book, it sounds quite interesting.
You'll enjoy it. I definitely did enjoy it, so I thought Gravity's Arrow is an excellent book, so it gets a thumbs up from me, so I think you would.
Do you know what? I need to start using Goodreads a little bit more. I'm going to, right now, jump on Goodreads and add Gravity's Arrow to my want to read list. I'm going to do that right this instant. So yes,
I must admit, I've got an upcoming problem with my next series of books based in the Shadeward universe. Is that I've got to have a think about how I want to approach it, because the emphasis on Shadeward has been that all the planets were colonized using sublight sort of generation ship vessels. But 2,000 years of technology has gone past since that point of colonization. And so I'm going to have to sit down and have a good head scratch as to, okay, well, where do I want my technology to have ended up after 2,000 years post a colonization event? Assuming technology has moved forward. So what does 2,000 years of technological progress actually look like in terms of space travel? So that's going to be quite a tough one. I'm going to have a hard think about that.
Do you know what? I might just have to interrupt the stream briefly. I'm starting to get CPU usage warnings about streaming something at 1080p. So I am just going to quickly interrupt the stream, downscale the resolution, and I think I'll just feel a little bit happier about that. So we will be back in just a second. Right, we should be live again now. Sorry about that. If you weren't having any issues, then so much the better. But yeah, just to make absolutely sure that no one is suffering from that, and it looks smoother on my end, so I'm a little bit happier as a result.
Awesome. We're back.
So I want to talk a little bit about Shadeward as well. So I read the first two books when the second book was coming out, and I got about...
You read the first two books when the second book was coming out?
Yes, when the second book, or just after the second book came out, I guess would be. So I think I read the first book on the run up to the second book being launched, and then I grabbed the second one at that point. And then I got about halfway through the second book, real life intervened, and I had to put it down for a time. And I had to say, up to that point, I thought I had a pretty good handle on how the world felt and who the characters were and where it was all going. I thought I had it all figured out.
Yep.
A few weeks ago, I finally picked it back up. I started from book 1 again, and as I was getting up to that point, I felt those ideas of what everything was reasserting themselves. I felt pretty solid, pretty concrete in my ideas. And I swear, within about 2 chapters of where I'd stopped, everything completely changed. And it's just been non-stop since then. I keep thinking I know what's going to happen, and it just completely subverts everything. I'm about 3 chapters from the end of book 3 now.
Okay. Yep.
And I swear, just
a bit of a shock coming up there as well.
Yeah. And it was just a couple chapters ago, maybe a day or 2 ago, I was practically slapping the book against my pillow as I read it at night, going, "Why are you doing that?" The characters are infuriating, Drew. They can't work together.
No, they're not very good at working together. It has to be said. Yep. Well, the trick is that the 3 main antagonists are, well, protagonists, I should say, really. Although they are quite antagonistic at times, as you worked out. They are very young. Well, relatively. I mean, they're sort of really early 20s, I suppose, in that sense. And I suppose, and not being, I know you're at this similar age. I'm being careful with what I say here.
Be brutal.
I made a lot of mistakes when I was that age, both in terms of relationships and decisions I made and things like that, which I suppose now is a little bit of a rich seam of knowledge and experience, but back in the time it certainly didn't feel like it. When you're trying to establish your personality and your purpose, and you're also trying to please your superiors and just find your place in the world, it can be very hard to decide what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong. And that's the sort of essence, I suppose, I'm aiming for with those 3 characters. You've got 3 very, very different people. You've got Kiri, who's very heavily indoctrinated as a result of her upbringing. You've got Maru, who's very dismissive of people unless they understand immediately what he's talking about and it's technologically correct.
Yeah.
And then you've got Zoella, who's sort of a bit more the heart and the soul of the group, but she's very naive and thinks everyone's nice and trusts everybody, and then that gets broken down bit by bit throughout the story. And each of them is trying to cobble together their own personalities, and what they think the universe, the world is actually about, and what their kind of place in it is. And that the assumptions they make earlier on turn out to be very, very incorrect. But I'm hoping I've painted them in such a way that the choices they make, or at least, even if you find them frustrating, they are understandable the way that they're thinking. So you're sort of being challenged all the way through. Who am I rooting for in this book? Is she the good guy, or is she the bad guy? Or is there no good guy or bad guy at all in this? And actually, I'm trying to avoid the kind of good guy, bad guy person. They're just people trying to find their way through some complicated situations, making a lot of mistakes as they go.
You're doing a great job with that, because I keep switching between who I think my favorite character is. At the moment, I think I'm putting myself mostly in Maru's shoes. He feels like the person I would most likely be.
Yep.
In that, but yeah, he can be an idiot at times as well.
He's not very good at relationships because he's very oriented around a technical understanding of things. He likes machines because they're very predictable. He likes working things out because it gives him a sense of accomplishment. But the people around him, of course, are people, and they react emotionally to things, and a lot of that to him is quite incomprehensible. So he just tries to muddle through the best he can, dealing with it. So, but yeah, he's probably quite like me as well, actually, in some ways. I have a lot of Maru, actually.
Is that a deliberate thing when you were writing his character to try and put
not really? No, I mean, I do sort of sometimes put myself into the situation. Well, how would I react in this situation? And I would, when he discovers how the maps work and how he discovers some of the other various bits and pieces. That is very much me. It's a new shiny thing. I've got to figure out how it works. That's definitely a trait that I have. But there are traits of me, I suppose, in all the other characters as well. But they're not specifically me in any sense. But they borrow from things I've seen or things I've experienced.
Awesome. Do you know what, when this was maybe a year or two ago when I was going through some of the later drafts of the Reality Exchange, and my girlfriend was reading through a bit, and she mentioned a character called Julian, who I always kind of fancied was a bit like me in some respects. He sort of approaches things from quite a skeptical way with this slightly antagonistic dry wit that gets on people's nerves a little bit, as I often do. And to me, he was quite a favourite character of mine. And while my girlfriend was reading through it, she didn't see me in it at all. She just said, "God, that Julian guy's an arsehole." I was like, "Really? I really like him." And then as I was reading through it on my next draft, and I was going, "No, she's right. She's right. He is an arsehole."
Oddly enough, it's funny how sometimes I get emails back about the books, and one of the standout things in the Shadeward saga is the secondary character Fitch is a massive favourite of everybody, and I think it's because he's got that sort of deadpan, snarky, tells it how it is sort of attitude, and he keeps interrupting the story with, that's what the readers are thinking. And that's why I included that character. Is okay. Well, they're all congratulating themselves, but they're not looking behind them, seeing the baddies coming in. Whereas he is, he's the kind of guy. Okay, let's party's over. We've got to get back and do the job, kind of thing.
Most of the time, when he comes up, I'm finding myself thinking, "God, Fitch, what a dick." He's right though.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and he will come in with what is socially inappropriate, but is actually the right thing for the point in time.
Yes.
And he doesn't care. He has no qualms about saying how it is.
Yeah, his skepticism is often very well placed. And
one thing I found, I don't know if you found this on your writing. One thing I found is obviously with Shadeward, a lot of the characters don't meet each other for quite a long time. And I was quite keen as I got into book 4, particularly. I thought, well, actually, I want some of these difficult characters to actually meet up and have conversations. So I did tweak the design of the story a little bit to allow conversations to happen between characters who are extremely polarized, and more out of my curiosity just to sort of see what would happen, really. So there are a few certainly in the final book, there's a few places where some of the characters that haven't met before actually do get to meet and have conversations and interact, which is quite fun. So and those dialogues can be extremely entertaining as a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to write a scene like that. I've got some ideas for future projects. There are a couple of places in the Reality Exchange where you've got people essentially interacting with each other but never actually talking. So you've got the again, not to define things too much for anyone who hasn't read it, but you've essentially got these two opposing sides who, for the most part of the book, haven't interacted directly with each other, but they're still communicating via Winter. And they're massively opposed to each other, and by the end they know how to approach each other and how to converse, even though they've never actually shared a conversation.
Yeah, because they're using Winter as a proxy, aren't they?
Yes.
Which is fun to watch. Yeah. That's interesting as well. The other thing I wanted to ask you actually is, and I can't be specific because it's spoilers for Reality Exchange, but and I've done this as well, so it's probably not spoilers in general, but we do kill some people, right?
Yes, we do. We certainly do.
And I was quite surprised actually in your book to that some death comes relatively early on to some fairly key characters. And I was like, "Ooh, okay, interesting." There's nothing wrong with that. I was just a little bit surprised. I mean, do you have qualms about killing people off, or is it all part of the Machiavellian scheme to trap the reader?
That's interesting. I like to keep the readers on their toes
Yep.
and know that no one is truly safe. I think that's the important thing for me. I don't have this sort of, like you say, George R.R. Martin fetish for killing everyone he possibly can. But yeah, I don't want people to get. I don't want a dangerous situation to arise and think that everything is just going to be fine because
Yeah,
there's
you
the
can't
main
have
characters and they've always got to be there.
you can't have plot armor, can you?
No. So that's kind of why I did that fairly early on. I wanted to set that expectation there that this person you've been growing attached to, oh no, they're
Yeah.
gone. And I've got some fairly brutal reminders of that scene throughout as well.
Yeah, so I when I read that, I think I read it in one of the earlier drafts that you sent through, kind of thing. But I remember thinking, oh, okay, well that's good actually, because I wasn't expecting that, and I wasn't expecting it from the story. And not to be fair, because obviously this is the first novel you've written, I wasn't expecting that from you as a new author either. So I thought that was actually quite a measured, well done thing to have done, actually. So again, big thumbs up for that, because I thought that was quite courageous. But it was really good. It does help the story in the sense that it gives the reader, okay, so like you say, nobody's safe. I'm just going to have to bear that in mind. And I did the same thing. I did the same thing in Shadeward. I have killed off some of the supporting cast in unexpectedly in the first book and in the second book as well. And people have sent me emails saying, "Oh, I was getting quite attached to those, and you killed them."
Yes, that's
and people and sort of also I've played the little game of leading the reader hopefully down the path of, oh, this is a really important character, so they're going to have a major part of, oh, they're dead.
Definitely in book 2 I can point to it. I really wish I could go into a bit more detail with this stuff, but there was a scene in book, actually just earlier in book 3. I don't think I wouldn't call them a key character at all. I wish I could. I hopefully you'll just get the one I'm talking about. It was just so quick. A character who was sort of barely introduced, and it seems like they're going to have this really substantial role to play, and then nope, they're gone. And even the character who did the deed, just completely nonchalant about it. Let's just carry right along.
Yeah. It's sometimes there to give you an insight into the way that character thinks and works.
Exactly, yes, and that's why I did it in my book as well. Partly to set the expectation of what I'm like as a writer and what I want you to think, but also because I wanted to give people more to go on about the characters that are involved and reason to love some and hate others, and drumming up a little bit of. I especially like drumming up a little bit of mystery about this particular character, giving the reader questions about who they are and why they're there, and then just not answering them.
Yeah, I think that's that's very cruel, but it's a
little
good
bit. I think I answer enough questions for it to be satisfying, but I've got to leave some. Life's not that kind.
You've got to leave a few ambiguities in there, and that also potentially gives you hooks for another book. I mean, with Shadeward, I've left thing at the end of book 1, 2, and 3 because I knew there's going to be a book 4, which is easy for me because I've plotted it out as a full book series anyway. But yeah, you don't want to answer everything because you've kind of okay, because it leaves the reader with some questions to still ponder over. And even at the end of the series, I've left a few things in there which, whilst they're not essential to the story, they kind of leave the reader able to make up their own ending to a certain extent, depending on your own outlook. So if you've got a religious mindset, then you'll possibly read that scene in one way, and if you're very much atheistic sort of person, then you might read the same scene but you take a different thing from it. and it allows the reader to go, okay, well, I'll take from that what I want to take from it, and that may be very different for different people.
Absolutely. I had a question in mind. It's completely escaped me. Oh no, I was going to say about some of those questions that you leave unanswered, whatever those might be, because I haven't reached the end of the series yet, so I'm not sure what threads are left hanging. Are they all answered definitively for you, or are some of them still questions, or just these sort of nebulous ideas, and you're happy to leave them that way?
Some of them are, not all of them, because I haven't done the work yet. Some of them relate to an upcoming series that may follow the Shadeward saga, so I haven't worked out all the detail. But I know that they deserve an answer, if that makes sense. So I'll hopefully get there at some point in time. I mean, the one that the sort of reference one that I always use in this case is Arthur C. Clarke's book Rendezvous with Rama.
Okay.
You've read that one, but Rendezvous with Rama was only supposed to be a standalone book. Okay. And he introduces this alien race called the Ramans who've sent an artifact into the solar system. We go and explore it and discover some stuff about it, but we never really get many of the answers from our exploration. But all you do find out is that the Ramans, these strange aliens that we never actually meet in the story, have 3 legs and 3 arms and seem to do, their architecture is tripod and everything has 3 sides. So they obviously have a big deal about the number 3. And Arthur C. Clarke, in his final draft of that book, as he was trying to just find a way of finishing it, basically said this spaceship goes around the Earth, goes around the solar orbit. We visit it, but we have to leave it before it reaches the closest approach. And this spaceship just keeps on going. It doesn't stop at Earth. It is completely indifferent to us. So it's like, what was it all about? And Arthur C. Clarke, very cleverly on his final draft, put the final sentence in as the commander of the spaceship who was watching it go, basically is musing on what happens next. He just says, the Ramans do everything in 3s. And he just leaves it there. And Arthur C. Clarke apparently never intended to write any sequels, but he left that in because he just thought it was a really, really cool way to end the story.
Probably entertained the idea of a trilogy.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, ultimately there were some other books written, but they were co-written by somebody else, and in my humble opinion, not very good. But but the original book is a bit of a masterpiece in that regard, and it's just a nice way to finish it. So, you certainly can leave things hanging for readers. And I've, when you get to the end of the Shadeward saga in book 4, there's sort of, I suppose, 3 goodbyes in it to the overall story. So you've got one from the perspective of now, and then there's a little bit of an epilogue and the sort of aftermath of things much later on. So you get to see a bit more of the context in which the events you've been reading kind of happen, which hopefully sets it up for for books in the future. So I'll let you get there on your own.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, it's all starting to ramp up at the moment at the end of book 3.
Yes, so there's a just trying to think. There's a massive battle at the end of book 3, isn't there?
There is.
Yeah,
I'm just coming up to that.
Yeah,
I think I've got 3 chapters left.
Yep.
Do you sort of this is a question going back to planning a little bit. So when I plan my book, I kind of do it by chapter. So I've got a couple of spreadsheets where I've basically said these are the chapter numbers. Here's a brief summary of what happens in this chapter, and then I've got things like word count and stuff to keep me on target.
Yeah.
And at this point, because I've stared at that spreadsheet so much, I can basically identify any scene from the reality exchange and tell you which chapter it's in.
No, I'm not that organised, actually. I always tend to end up with chapters of about the same length and about the same number of chapters. So most of my books seem to be about 18 to 22 chapters long. So my chapters are big and long and old-fashioned. But that they always seem to be roughly the same length. I tend to work in sort of scenes, and that's been quite more so, I suppose, in Shadeward, is because I'm having to swap from different geographical areas, because some of the characters are in different places. Then I tend to stay in that geographical area for the duration of a chapter and do all the stuff that's happening in that area before moving on to the next one. Sometimes there are a few exceptions to that, particularly as the pace changes, but
yes,
you have to see multiple things happening at the same time. So mostly it's chronological stroke geographically based. But there are some exceptions to that depending on what's going on. But yeah, I don't actually tend to plan in chapters. I tend to plan in scene arcs, and then sometimes the chapter boundary will fall at a particular point. I'll go, actually, no, I'm going to back that off a little bit. Make sure the chapter ends on a cliffhanger of some sort. So you're always left wondering, oh, well, what's going to happen to them next? The idea being to kind of keep you reading. So it depends a little bit, but no, I don't write to chapters specifically. I write generally to scenes, and then sometimes that falls in the chapter boundary, but not always.
I actually noticed you fit an awful lot of stuff in a single chapter. There are cases where something will feel like it's happened ages ago in the book, and I realise it's just at the start of this chapter. Someone will discover a piece of information, then they'll talk about it like it was yesterday. A bit later on, I would think, hang on, that was just a... So it feels incredibly fast-paced in that way.
It is, actually. I got some, particularly book 3, because originally Shadeward was going to be 5 books, but when I kind of replotted it, I thought, it's going to be a bit of a stretch to make it 5 books. It'll be a bit thin. And in that process, I think book 3 in particular got a little bit compressed. So I have had some constructive critique actually from quite a few people that book 3 feels a bit rushed in places, a bit so fast paced. There's never time to draw breath. So I did take that on board in book 4 and thought, and book 4 is a little bit longer. It's about 10,000 words longer than the other one.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, a couple of chapters in my land, and I've given a few places in book 4 where the characters do get to stop and sort of have a campfire and and just chat around the campfire and just take a breather. So there are a few places in book 4 where that does occur, just to give the reader a little bit of a slower pace as well, because book 3 is a bit full on, I have to say. Yeah.
I haven't gotten the impression of rushed yet, but I've definitely got incredibly fast-paced and thinking, my God, is this ever going to slow down?
They sort of lurch from one crisis to another in book 3, and they've got personality problems going on as well, and an awful lot of bad stuff happening to them and coming towards them. So it's designed to be tense because it's leading up to this confrontation, obviously, that's coming, and it's been coming really since the beginning of the book started. So the moment in book 1 that you get the and it's on the back cover, so I can talk about them. You get the witches of Drayden have been identified as a foe really early on in book 1, before anybody even knows who they are and where they are. They're about, and ultimately there's going to be some sort of showdown between the forces of kind of enlightenment and the forces of religious indoctrination. So that's coming. You just don't know when, and it slowly builds. But it does come to a big head at the end of book 3.
It does, and they definitely feel like the antagonists by that point. Speaking of fast-paced, the reality exchange. I was told that it was fast-paced before I realised that it was.
It's definitely fast-paced. It doesn't. There's very little time for you to get your bearings as a reader before stuff starts exploding and people get kidnapped and stuff gets implanted in your neck. And
yeah, it's true, and I've realised that now. But originally, I was thinking a lot of this book is people talking.
Yep.
It's a weird sort of. It's fast paced, but it's mostly, certainly for the, I guess what I would call the second act, mostly conversational.
Yep.
And until all the action kicks in.
Much more dynamic. Conversations are much more dynamic than description. So, and I avoid description as much as I can, to be honest. It's a sort of thing that you just use as a bit of garnish around the conversations. I mean, your stories and my stories have that in common, that they're character driven. They're not event driven. Yeah. And they're not sort of plot driven in that sense. It's the character interactions that are driving the story forward. So people having arguments, people whacking at each other and trying to get one over another. That's the essence of the storytelling. Yeah. And the description is just okay, as they look around themselves just before getting back into the next argument, what do they see? And then obviously there are action sequences as well, but those are fast paced because they have to be fast paced, because you have to kind of the airlock's opening, I'm being sucked out the airlock, or someone's swinging a sword at me, or whatever it happens to be. I've got to duck, I've got to parry, and all those sort of things. That has to be fast paced by nature. But if you have massive big chunks of description, it gets very ploddy. And a lot of readers will go, oh, when's the next character interaction? I just want to get back to what they're talking about. But people will zip through the character dialogue really, really quickly because it's interesting. You're hearing what people are saying and you're trying to read what they're up to and all that sort of thing. And that's the bit that readers like, I think, a lot, is that they're through the words, they're getting a sense of the characters.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So much easier to read than the ploddier descriptions of various bits and pieces.
Mm. Yeah, although the readings that I've presented so far have been mostly description.
Yep.
Interestingly, so I basically gave the first half of chapter 1, and the reading that was shown earlier on was the end of chapter 3, and I don't think there was any dialogue in that at all. Which I was thankful for because I didn't have to do any character voices.
Yep.
And I think I've mostly avoided that because the dialogue stuff is probably the most spoilery.
I think if you're giving a reading, it's tricky to choose bits that don't give away the plot if you're looking at the character dialogue. Particularly if you've only got the one book. I mean, I can pinch a piece of dialogue out of mine and it'll be hopefully reasonably interesting, but because it's spread across 4 books, it's not really going to give much away other than the characters are in trouble again, or they're arguing again, or or something like that. Whereas most of the dialogue, I think, in your story is actually driving the plot along in the context of characters and the actual situation that's actually happening. Because you've got almost effectively, you've got I suppose 3 parts to your story in my head. You've got the initial place where the setup is established.
Yeah.
Then you've got the ship itself. And then you've got what happens when the ship finally arrives at its destination. Those to me are the sort of 3 pillars of the book.
Yeah, you've got it's a journey. You've got the departure, you've got the journey, and then you've got the destination. Is kind of those are my 3 acts, as I like to think of it.
Yeah, and so if you've got 3 acts, then anything is going to be relatively spoilery potentially. But how many acts I've got? Quite a few, I think.
Probably. Yeah. It's difficult to chunk yours into multiple parts because there are so many things overlapping each other in yours. So many different parallel events, whereas mine's basically just different people in different parts of one constant thing.
I'm trying to tell a number of things. You've got the actual story, but you've also got the perspectives of the different people in the different areas. And you're also trying to establish with the reader the weird and wonderfulness of this place, which is very, very different from Earth, which the characters, of course, take for granted because they live there. But you're trying to get across to the reader that actually, no, this looks weird the reason it looks weird is because we're not on the Earth. But the characters don't look at it weirdly because that's what they've grown up with, so it's all normal as far as they're concerned. Just trying to get them to react in a normal fashion. Whereas you're still trying to get across the strangeness to the readers, which is a fun balancing act.
Another thing I'm curious to ask you about actually is diversity and character diversity, which is quite a hot topic at the moment when we're talking about fiction, especially when people think about stories with strong female protagonists, for example. Yeah. Was that a conscious effort on your part? Because as I'm reading through, I'm thinking there are a lot of different kinds of people, especially because you've got different continents and different cultures and things like that. But there's an awful lot of diversity in there, and I'd like to think I have a fairly diverse cast of characters as well. Is that something you were consciously thinking about and trying to make sure that you spread yourself quite?
Yeah. This is a tricky one because I'd kind of like to say yes, but the actual truthful answer is no. And I'm wary of these things. I'm wary of filling up quotas of diversity characters just because that worries me a little bit. That you're compromising the story you want to tell because of the audience that may or may not read it. I'm not a fan of the the way of thinking that basically says unless you actively challenge the society of the world today by the stuff that you create as fiction, then you're missing an opportunity. I don't subscribe to that. I'm of the opinion that I should be able to write a fictional story using characters of my choice because that's the story I want to write, and I'm not trying to preach at anybody, and I'm not trying to make a lesson. However, we do exist in a multicultural world and a multi-gender world and all those other things. So I don't think it's impossible to ignore. It's not possible to ignore that. Did I make a conscious choice on gender? Not really. Maru came across, for example, as a typical young lad who's been given some shiny toys. It started off exactly like that. And Kiri and Zoella are, obviously girls, or young women, but they are very, very different. They don't have a great deal in common for during the early stages of the book in particular.
They are, and in their role in the story, they're actually with these powers, they have to be female as far as the world building goes.
So I did make a distinction there. I thought, okay, well, there is a lot of talk about the patriarchy and in the world today. What if I constructed a society whereby gender specifically gave you capabilities, or at least certain members of gender gave you specific capabilities that actually did make you superior? So there was no argument about some of the women in Shadeward have these strange mental powers that there is no defense against. And they can overwhelm you with them should they choose to do so. So they are superior in that sense. And I said, well, how would that alter the structure of society? So I did play around with that very, very specifically. But that isn't really a reflection on society today. It was just a dramatic choice that I made in order to make the story kind of be a bit more interesting.
Gotcha.
And then okay, well, why would they have mental powers? So I went through that process of doing those sort of things. In terms of, things like, skin color and stuff like that, well, I have included a society of people who have darker skins, and that's simply due to the latitude on the planet that they live. Mm-hmm. So closer to the substellar pole on the planet, it's hotter. So, and there's more ultraviolet radiation. So naturally people there have, darker skin. I've not made any, at least I hope I haven't, differences in terms of the way they react and the way they interact. There, there's male and female people there. They fight, they argue, they do politics. It's literally just a bit of flavour to demonstrate that you're on a slightly different part of the planet than we were originally. I hope I haven't introduced any bias into there. So I've got. I think the phrase now is people of colour in the story, how you visualise the main characters is entirely up to you. All I tend to do, I don't tend to tell you how tall they are, or what they're like. I do use eye colour because I find that quite a useful way to distinguish between people. So
yeah, that's a very prominent descriptor that you like to use.
Yeah, so I use that one quite a lot. You'll notice it with Kiri in particular. The black hair, blue eyes comes across quite a lot, and it's a very significant thing about Kiri, just to differentiate it from everybody else. But as to Kiri's skin color, it's never mentioned. So you can choose to imagine her how you wish. I mean, I've imagined her in a particular way, but that's my business. So it's entirely up to you. Where I felt it was important to call something out because we're in a hotter part of the world, then I've said, and Kiri's noted it. This person she's met, the skin color is very dark, but it's nothing more than we're in a different part of the world, and trying to establish that sort of thing.
And it is the kind of thing you notice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you sort of, okay, well, they're obviously they look a bit different to what I'm used to, so it's her surprise that kind of comes across, that sort of thing. In terms of the LGBT sort of thing, I haven't been brave enough to do it yet, to be honest, because I like to write from a position of knowledge, and I just don't feel I have the expertise yet to do justice to it, and I didn't need it to tell the story of Shadeward, so I haven't really gone there. But it's something that I'm aware of, something that I will consider for future stories. and particularly I think in a space opera context where both technology and society is hopefully, if not more advanced, potentially more sophisticated, then there's opportunities for that sort of thing as well in the storytelling. But it wasn't something I was consciously thinking about at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'd like to say that I had quite a similar approach to that. I wasn't trying to preach any kind of narrative. A lot of the stuff is left particularly deliberately vague. So, like you said, with Winter, and in fact a lot of the protagonists, I haven't mentioned things like their skin color, so they can the reader can imagine that as they like. Obviously, there is a depiction of Winter on the front cover, and she is depicted as white. But again, that is and something I specifically wanted when coming up with the book cover is I didn't want any definitive depictions of a character's face.
Yeah.
And if there were any characters on there, I wanted it to be really vague about what they looked like, aside from the things that I did mention in the book, like hair color and length and things like that. Because it's important to me that the readers can have their own.
You've got to, as an author, distinguish between the characters that you do have.
Exactly.
You do that in the sense of their dialogue will always look a little bit different, but sometimes it's useful to say so-and-so's got blonde hair and so-and-so's got black hair, just so people know who you're talking about.
Precisely.
So, yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, I haven't done that. I've suggested in certain places that things might be the case. So there's a character called Sam, who is... I think I mentioned at one point that her surname is Yuki, and the suggestion is as that's quite a common Japanese name, that she is, in my notes, she is half Japanese.
Right.
But again, that's sort of not directly addressed. Her name is there, and it's mentioned that she has a different accent from Earth to some of the other characters that she's met. But aside from that, nothing is said deliberately. There are a couple of passengers on the ship where I left it even more vague than that. With the passengers, I didn't even go so far as to say what their names were. I just said this is a vague appearance, and they sort of come in these groups so that you can identify them a little bit easier. And there were two. Ooh, don't know what I've done there. There are two male characters, and I had them. I had it so that they looked fairly similar. They sort of copied each other's mannerisms quite closely. But I didn't want to say specifically. In my mind, they were either twins or they were a gay couple.
Yep.
And I never went so far as to say in my notes which one of those was the case. So
you can leave it up to the reader to decide, can't you?
Yes, exactly.
Which I think is reasonable. Yep.
And then the one that gets brought up most often and is most significant is the character called Haley, she's disabled. She is missing the lower half of one of her legs, and I was told it was actually my stepdad who was a really helpful in terms of proofreading and things like that, and he said that it was really impressive that I had a strong disabled character who can stand on her own. And honestly, for the most part of the book, I wasn't even thinking about her disability. The reason I included it wasn't because it was some aspect of diversity. It was because she is really closely involved with this SSR system that they use throughout the book. And I wanted to really physically manifest the idea that it's a really important thing to her and that she is literally incomplete without it. And so when she steps inside, she has this virtual manifestation of her leg, and she can walk around normally and all that. So it's kind of a literary device in a way, and just means that she is in some ways diminished by being outside of it, and not having that thing in her life literally makes her incomplete.
Yeah, I thought it was a very cunning way you did that, because I thought the same thing when I saw the character, and then I saw the virtual reality representation of her, and thinking, yes, well, of course, in the virtual world, you can, she doesn't even have to be herself; she could be anybody else, couldn't she, if she wanted to be? And given that the SSR in your books is sort of entirely immersive, i.e., you really can't tell that you're in it when you're in it. it's a powerful metaphor for basically saying you can be who you want to be regardless of whatever physical condition you are in whatever we decide to call reality.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that is, of course, where the name comes in, the reality exchange. Yeah. There we go. It's finally explained, everyone. We got there. I've had myself in a bit of a rut about making a sequel and making sure that I used what was iconic to this story and what people grew to know about the world of the reality exchange, because there's only so much exploration of the world in that, and I had to make sure that I still included that somewhere. But I obviously just didn't want to tell the same story twice. There's so many boring sequels out there that basically just do the same thing as the first one, just in a slightly different way. Like, I'm looking at the Hunger Games. I'm looking at, I don't know, Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I put up a sulky tweet about Jurassic. Was it Jurassic World, the last one?
No, one of the Jurassic Worlds. I think there have been a few, haven't there?
Anyway, whichever one was the last one a couple of years ago, I remember thinking, oh, brilliant, I'm going to see a dinosaur film. This time, of course, they'll have got all the park systems sorted out. Nothing will go wrong, because surely they watched those movies in the 90s, right? Oh, no, the dinosaurs have got out again. Damn.
And of course, there's the good old classic. They built another Death Star.
Yeah, exactly. A bit bigger than the last one. Yeah. So, yeah, it's good. Yeah, and that's, I must admit, I'm wary of that for the the follow up to the Shadeward. I do want to do a space opera again, because I kind of enjoyed doing the Elite ones. That's now three and a bit years in the past. So, and with Shadeward completed, I do want to go back and do a space opera. But in much the same way as the conversations we had, say, okay, well, what do you do that's different?
Yeah.
Because we've had we've had Farscape, we've had Star Wars, we've had Star Trek, we've had what's the Joss Whedon one? Firefly. Yeah, we've had Firefly, we've had Battlestar Galactica, we've had the reboot of Star Trek, we've had more Star Wars films, we've had Dark Matter, and they're all fun and worthy in their own ways, and they've got different spins on things. And it's kind of like, okay, well, what am I going to do that's different? So I literally take my hat off for you for coming up with a new premise there. That's very imaginative, and I've got that challenge myself now. Is okay, what do I do that is not derivative of something else that's gone before? And that's always a tough one nowadays, particularly with science fiction, I think.
You mentioned that it was going to be, as it's set in the same world as Shadeward, obviously, but it's a different spaceship that went away from Earth in a different direction to a different planet. Are there still going to be these sort of common threads between them somehow?
So the premise in Shadeward was, and you find out a little bit more this in book 3 and book 4, but so not too much in the way of spoilers, but basically you find out, and you've probably worked out already, that Shadeward was settled after the planet Azurio in Shadeward, should I say, was settled after some sort of mass exodus from Earth. The details are a bit sketchy. Now 2,000 years has gone past, 2,000 and a bit years has gone past since that event, and on Azurio, technology regressed and everything collapsed, and you ended up with this sort of feudal state, which the planet civilization is only just beginning to pull itself out of, as the stories of Shadeward have been told. The premise is that there were lots of other vessels that went to lots of other systems at around about the same time as the one that went to Azurio. 2,000 years since gone past. Presumably some of those ships will have failed, but maybe some of them succeeded. And if they did succeed in colonizing a world out there, maybe some of them didn't fall back into regression like Azurio did. Maybe they went on forwards from that point in time. So you're talking somewhere around the year 2900, I think I've got it set in as roughly when Shadeward is on an Earth calendar. And you've got to come.
Really? I thought it was 2,000 years hence from now. I thought it would be closer to.
Oh no, it must be more. Yeah, sorry, you're right. 2000. I'll have to go and look it up. I can't remember now. No, because it's right. It's somewhere in the 22nd century that Earth gets abandoned. It's 600 years from then. That's 2800. So yeah, it's 2800 plus 2000 and a bit. So it's around about the 5000 AD, somewhere, something like that.
Cool. And that's interesting in itself, because there are so many science fictions that are sort of future but not super future, like maybe 2500 or something like that. They rarely go into this far future. I can only really think of Warhammer that went all the way to 40,000.
40,000, yeah. So I'm a bit further forward. So I've got to have a good think about, okay, in terms of where we go with technology in 2,000 years' time. I'm obviously going to get it wrong, but yeah, you've got to go some estimated guesses.
I don't think you'll find many critics of that particular aspect. 2,000 years on, people criticising.
Yeah, it won't be like that. That's very. So so I've got to have a think about that. But the idea being that whatever else has happened out there, it's running in parallel with events that you've already seen on the Zero, which gives me the possibility of a crossover at some point in the future. If, let's say, one of those other planets becomes aware of a Zero, or maybe they already are aware and there's a reason that they're not there, or maybe they're already on their way to go and visit. All those questions could be answered. I haven't decided yet. So that's all the book.
Well, it's coming up on 5:30, and I don't want to keep you any longer than.
No, I appreciate your time.
So, I'm sorry to everyone in the Twitch chat that I wasn't looking at that more and answering questions, though it looks like you've been having a great discussion among yourselves. Yeah, all just kind of got caught up in these fascinating subjects we were talking about on our own. But yeah, I'd love to do another stream like this. I don't know, because there are so many times during this discussion where I've thought I really want to talk about that, but I can't because of spoilers.
Yeah, we give people a bit of time to get to the end of the books, and I've got them into the public domain for a while. So.
Yeah, but yeah, it'd be great to do one and just have massive spoiler warnings on the whole thing, and talk about everything as basically as in depth as we like. So I will do myself the favour of finishing the Shadeward saga. It shouldn't take me too much longer now because, as I say, I'm getting pretty close to the final book.
I enjoy that.
And
brace for impact on the ending.
Well, luckily for me, I can dive straight into book 4 after that.
Yes, right? You haven't got the way. I'm quite proud of my record yet. All of my reviews and all the emails I've had, and everybody I know who's read it has been crying at the end. So I'm quite proud of that. I'll be interested to see what you think of it.
That reminds me, I really must go back and leave reviews on the books that I have read. I haven't done that very much, but that's a good reminder for you guys as well. If for anyone in the chat who has read any of these books, reviews are extremely useful to Drew, myself, and of course all of the other authors.
Definitely.
And
it's a very, very powerful thing. It's the best way if you want to say thanks to an author for all the work they've done in producing a book and etc., and everybody involved, the editors and the publishers and everybody else. Please review the books. It is the best thing you can do for us.
Absolutely.
Obviously.
And of course, aside from just being a wonderfully practical thing you can do, we also just love to read it. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside. So please go ahead and do that. A quick reminder that the Reality Exchange and the Shadeward Saga are both available on Amazon right now. You can get the Reality Exchange in paperback and ebook, Shadeward Saga in those formats as well as audiobooks.
Audiobooks, first 2 are done. The third one is in QA with Fantastic Books, actually. So if they're still in the chat, they'll be able to tell you when the third. Yeah, well, roughly anyway, because it's down to Amazon. But it's coming soon. I don't like using the word soon, but it's relatively soon. It's the third book in Audible will be available.
Lovely. And yeah, so the links are right below. Go ahead and click those, and you'll be taken to the Amazon pages. And yeah, and of course, spread them around. Tell everyone you know. Definitely. Yep. Anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you, James. Thank you very much. And to you, Drew. Thank you for entertaining me with this this chat, and thanks for agreeing to it on such short notice as well. It's been great chatting to you, and it's been really interesting and enlightening.
Fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Then I will end the stream here. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Drew, for coming. And yeah, hope to speak to you all soon.
Take care, guys. Thank you very much for the people in the chat.
Bye.